Driving business value with data and analytics. It is wonderful to see you all here on a Monday morning, afternoon, wherever you are. It's still Monday, but we're together, which makes all Mondays better. So, welcome to the Hotwire Measurement Month event. It is wonderful to have you all here. And Measurement Month is part of the AMEC celebration of everything data, analysis, metrics, everything that makes PR and comms really meaningful to your organization when we get down to it. And so we take the month of November to celebrate every year with perhaps some encore performances in December because you can't fit all of that fun into a single month. And it is such a pleasure to be joined today by Matt Oakley, the Global Head of Data and Analytics of Hotwire, and Natan Edelberg, sorry about that, Natan, the Chief Relationships Officer at Muck Rack. I can't think of a better way to get us all started. And, we are talking about some current research that both of these organizations have done. And it really is one of my favorite things and a way to supercharge these events is when partners and members collaborate and bringing great data together. And these two have been doing it ever since Sophia. So they definitely have a leg up and a running start into all that is good information for the industry so that they can continue some of these promotions. So let's go ahead and turn the time over first, Matt, to kind of go through where we are with some of the research that you guys have, with Natan, to start where you guys are with some of that research and where you can get it started.
Thank you. Really excited to be here. And Matt, thanks for inviting me. It's fun to have a sequel to our session from Sophia at the main measurement event. So just to kick things off, this is really good timing for us because we recently completed our newest state of measurement report where we surveyed nearly 500 PR professionals about their measurement challenges today. This was done last month, so it's very, very fresh, similar to the timeliness of the study Matt's going to go over. And the first big thing that we wanted to dig into are just what are the biggest challenges everyone's facing today. And I think what hasn't changed as the biggest one is the idea of how hard it still is to link PR metrics to business goals. So this isn't something necessarily new, but is still really, really important. And I think the second one that I wanted to highlight is just how important it is to manage stakeholder expectations. I think we're constantly, as an industry, still facing a reality where there's lots of new and exciting measurement strategies and tactics that we want to take, but sometimes we're stuck with either less innovative options or simply options that our stakeholders understand, whether that's the board or the leadership team or a client. I think that's kind of what I wanted to first challenge and then just first highlight. And then just one last point to make about, the last point on here, which is only at 14%, but still important, is the difficulty in hitting goals. And I think that's kind of like the epitome of what we face as communications professionals is that regardless of what metrics we use or what measurement standards we set, it's not as easy as like a sales goal to just hit that target. And I think it's a good reminder that it's not only about the types of metrics that we're using or how we're measuring them, but what's kind of realistic with the goals. So that's part one. And in terms of the next slide, um, the most staggering thing is how this affects the most important thing, our budgets. So I think it's kind of a good sign that almost half of our industry said that their budget could be affected by whether or not they reach their goals. That's really promising, and I think that gives big credit to our industry, to AMEC, to everyone in this world that's pushing forward measurement. But for those of you working with PR professionals or a PR professional yourself, I think what we're finding is that budget is really, really key when it comes to hitting goals. And I think this means that we can't just set goals that are completely unrealistic, that it's impossible to hit them, but that it's really important to use this as an opportunity to sync up with those deciding on your budgets to make sure that they happen. And I also think this is really promising that we're getting closer towards that first thought I was mentioning, where we really need to use measurement to achieve those business goals. So again, I think this is promising that nearly half say yes to this, but it's still something that's very much evolving. So those are kind of the two highlights. We'll dig into some other metrics throughout, and I think this is a really good intro to some of the topics that I know Matt's going to get into now as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Natan. And I think, as we kind of have the conversation, it's important to understand that while having a goal is really critical, aligning it with the organization is critical. When the organization misses their goals, you should be missing your goals in some respects, right? When you are properly aligned. And I think when you have your eyes set on that target, the piece that I think CEOs tend to lean away from when it comes to the credibility of PR data is they're consistently and almost constantly given charts and reports where everything is going great. So no matter what's happening with the stock price, with the business, with any of their other models, things, have an ebb and flow. But those PR charts, we always want to report those that are going up. And so I think there is a real credibility of that data that when you are aligned and you are reporting on credible data that has a correlation to what you're trying to do, that's going to matter too. And that's going to, I think, play into that, how it affects your budget with how realistic you are and how aligned you are with what's making sense there. So I think that's really powerful. And I think that 14% is about right, because I think, it's the old Babe Ruth, right? The same year that he made the world record, the league record for home runs, he also led the league in strikeouts. So everything is not perfect. All charts don't go up, and we have to be realistic in order to give that credibility to the data. So I think these results are really critical. And I
Yeah,
think that's
well
going to lead
said.
us
Thank
into
you.
kind of, that first question that I want us to really be able to discuss. And I'm going to start with you, Matt, but how fundamental is, here we are in 2024, right? How fundamental is data to PR and comms in decision-making, and how does it drive that process?
Yeah, thanks, Jonna, and nice to be with you all today. So this is just one of the charts that we've taken from our own report that we conducted this year. And Natan, great to be back talking with you as the sequel to our Sophia event. And we were looking at delivering this report really for our own benefit to understand how we can help clients up level with data, but obviously on my position on the board of AMEC, which I'm very grateful for, it really helps us educate the industry more effectively as well. So this chart just shows that 31% of PR pros are still leaning on gut instinct rather than data, which is fairly scary as a data professional. But obviously that shows me where I can add my value and help bring clients along to. Only 11% of PR pros think that data is foundational to the way that they think and the way that they operate. So this our results when we surveyed maybe a little bit less than the TAN. So I think we got about 300 responses in our first iteration. We're going to make this an annual thing, so look out for the next iteration next year. But and hopefully we'll see the results improve and evolve over time. But this is really where we see that in PR and comms, people are still leaning on their gut feel and their expertise more so than driving fully with data. So I think with the education, the resources that we deliver through AMEC and some of the consultancy that we're delivering through Hotwire, we're really trying to guide clients to look at the data, understand where their audience is against their objectives, and start to use that in their approach, so that we see that 11% or some of that 31% start to eke into the other two responses. So what we're seeing here is maybe a little bit less of a percentage than we'd want in the data sphere, but I think if we had done this 5 years ago, I think that 31% might have been that 58% that we see in the middle, and so on and so forth. So I think we are seeing progress, but still a ways to go, I think, which is means that we've all got value to add on this call for sure.
And I think a lot of what we see in conversation. So I know that I don't think you took demographic information with this, but I think when we look at this with 5 generations in the workplace, right, that a lot of that gut instinct data is, or that gut instinct decision making is based on trend data through experience within the organization, within the industry, that is, analog as opposed to digital. So it doesn't formulate and go into the spreadsheet quite as cleanly as a lot of the data does now. But, in talking to a lot of CCOs and in talking to a lot of leaders, they might call it gut instinct, but what they aren't revealing is that it's also based on a 30-year career, specialized in a specific industry, and as they've seen crises and as they've seen other trends, it does model along that trend data. And so I think the interesting follow-up to that for those that do talk about that gut instinct is, what is your longevity in the industry, in your vertical, that can be helpful to kind of level set some of that so it isn't quite so alarming. And maybe I dream big. I mean, that's also a reality, but I do think in some of those conversations that I have frequently, it's always interesting to me where I kind of nudge in and ask like it's a little bit cringy. And I'm usually very pleasantly surprised by what that answer is that it is data. It's different data than what we're used to seeing on, in the spreadsheet, but it is based on that experience data that we can't totally undervalue either. So,
yeah,
and just
yeah, definitely. Just to jump in off that, John, it'll be interesting to see as like the traditional PR landscape evolves, whether that 31% like goes across with the new channels that people are trying to activate on, that maybe they're not so familiar with from previous campaigns and previous expertise. We'll start to see data research and that kind of hard data become more prevalent in people's thinking.
Well, and I think it's that consumer data, right? That Gen Z consumer data that every report, every data set, it's 20% of the market, but every data set is skewing towards that generation, right? That I think it will be interesting to really look at it holistically as we see all of the generations and identify those consumer facets as we're looking at the larger picture. So it really, I mean, it's great time. It's fun times to be in data. This is absolutely the best time. So it's very exciting. And the fact that both of your organizations are doing research to lead that effort is fantastic because it really leads us into this next piece, right? So that frequency of collecting measurements, how important is that, Matt? And I think you guys have some new stats for that as well.
Yeah, sure. So what we wanted to look at here was how often are teams collecting data and analyzing data, because I know one of the things that Jim McNamara spoke about at the AMEC summit was this idea of measurement, evaluation, and learning. And that's the approach that we take as well at Hotwire. We want to continuously learn from the information that we're seeing on campaigns. So this question that we asked is really to understand how our clients are looking at it as well. Are they just collecting it as and when they need it? Or are they looking at things on a continual basis and understanding which content might be resonating? Are the media outlets that they're wanting to target still the right targets based on the audience? And so what's funny about this chart is that we see quite an even split. So next year's report will be interesting to see if one is starting to skew more than other when we get more responses and hopefully can do some of that segmentation that you mentioned, Jonna. So what we always advise our clients to do is look at data on that continuous basis, like when we're running campaigns over different channels, whether we're looking at different audiences, we're trying to understand and get to grips with what's working well, what's not. Are we working against those core objectives that Natan was talking about previously? How do you manage that stakeholder expectations if you're not looking at data on a on a continual basis. So this was really interesting to us to just get that pulse check, and then for us to see where we as a consultancy and how we're helping clients, how we align with this expectation and what we're seeing from PR pros as well.
And I will share a personal analogy that you can share with everyone you know, as a sense of why data matters, why ongoing collection is important. Because when you return to your house after the whole family being gone for 2 weeks to find that the refrigerator and the freezer have broken, there is a expectation that that would work properly and that there would be no problems, especially if there is no power outage or anything. But when that happens, what you realize is it isn't until you get home that you know that everything has gone wrong and you have to replace everything. And so, you know, the ability and the kind of old trend of, we'll just do that, you know, report card and, you know, do that looking back of how did we do, that does not work. If you aren't looking, you know, yes, there is an expectation that things would be working and that all of your tactics would be performing. It would be incorrect. It is the canary in the coal mine, the ultimate refrigerator, the presumption that it would work until it doesn't. And then it is a big mess. And so I would encourage everyone to learn from this very painful object lesson that I have shared, that if you are treating your comms data as a refrigerator and you don't have someone actually going in and some way to check it, which soon they'll all be digital and it won't matter. We can just check on an app. But until then, you know, make sure that you are monitoring things on an ongoing basis, because things can change unexpectedly without some of the obvious external factors that you might be able to predict. And it's really important to be able to know and identify that as early as possible so that you don't keep spending a lot of money on things that aren't working, you know. And that's that budget piece, I think, that you were talking about earlier, Natan, where budget is so critical, but we have to be good stewards of that budget, right? And that means that we are performing for the facets that are continuing to improve and to reach that market that are really credible. And I think, you know, as we go to this next piece, Natan, I think that you and Matt have, you know, talked about this previously. So I'm going to take a step back and let the two of you battle out the best way to future-proof some of your comms. Go.
All right, Matt,
Okay.
this is where we get at it. We'll just quickly, I wanted to make two comments quick. Johnny, you definitely need a Wi-Fi enabled fridge. My fridge unfortunately isn't, but my oven, washer, dryer, many of it is Wi-Fi, and it's lovely to know when the dryer is complete when I'm away from home. But I digress. I really loved seeing those results, you know, highlighting what we were just talking about. Just wanted to, you know, quickly add that, you know, coming from a technology company, it speaks really near and dear to my heart because, you know, obviously, like us and many technology providers, we've been trying to make measurement more accessible. And I think even from some of the best technology tools from 10 years ago, it still required a lot of human intervention to make it possible, which could be more costly. And I think we all know that the perfect mix is having the great experts like Matt and your team, as well as the greatest technology tools. And something we've always prided ourselves is trying to make like actionable insights and measurement, but stuff that can really be easily spun up and that you know, doesn't always need an entire team to help put it together. That should be accessible to the average, you know, PR comms person, regardless of what generation you're coming from, who might have more experience or might be more native to doing it. As you mentioned, John, there's 5 generations in the workforce now, and I think some are going to be more savvy at putting together a report than others. I fall somewhere in the middle of that, but if you have great tools, and obviously now generative AI tools to help make that even easier. So that's kind of point number one. And before I let you go, Matt, in terms of like the C-suite and laddering up, I think my kind of feedback is very much tied to that because part of being able to, you know, manage up and get your C-suite what you need is the ability to move quickly with things that are complex and to be able to put together a report very quickly to measure something at the speed of sound almost when it's needed, whether that's a crisis or something really goes on, or a TikTok went viral and you need to see how that's impacting traditional media. You need to have the tools to be able to do that, whether it's the tools that I'm working at or other tools. I think that's a really, really clear takeaway I want people to have, that you can't rely on only going to a separate team to ask you to put something together. That needs to be always going to need to happen for something more complex, something that you need to put together and needs to be a little bit more polished. But if someone asks you, like, is this impacting us or not, you need to have some really good data very quickly to be able to get back to your C-suite team. And I think anyone who does not feel comfortable doing that, no matter what technology tools you're using, you should start thinking about that, because I think that's how we're gonna need to move more forward into the future. But definitely excited to hear what you think too, Matt.
Yeah, and just to jump off on that, I think one of the things that we saw, or I saw from doing the judging in the AMEC Awards this year, was how clear some of the storytelling was, and how well teams are starting to tell the story of the programs that they're running and the value that they're adding. And I think if we think about delivering value to the C-suite, they don't want to be drowning in 50 slides of pretty much worthless numbers and things like John and you said about everything pointing up. They want to see, okay, what did we achieve, and how can I take this and shape the business around this, either now with the budget that we've got right now, or in the future, what are we going to do, and what tactics are we going to deliver? So I think the days of sending over 50-page slides, 50 slide decks to C-suite, hey, they should never have happened, and B, thankfully, I think they're long gone. So I think this slide just emphasizes that kind of value over vanity, which is something that we always talk about. But not only that, is how can you take action on that insight? Like, what are we taking forward in the town, like you said, with some of the technology now that we've got access to? I think a lot of the measurement and the insights that we deliver now can't just be looking back. And I think, Johnny, you mentioned that previously, it has to be looking forward. So is there a predictive element? Are we seeing trends within the data? We need to have the right technology to see trends clearly. And it can't always be the teams, such as my team, who are dedicated data analysts. It has to be that kind of democratizing data and democratizing that insight, so that we can make smart decisions quicker, and deliver value back to the business if we're going to keep on evolving and adding value. And that kind of future proofing type mindset is more on the, like, how do we start using Gen AI? Obviously, everyone's talking about Gen AI, but it's not going away. I think that's one of the things that I've tried to stress to my colleagues, is the teams that use generative AI solutions smartly, get familiar with these tools, are the ones that are going to probably stay ahead. It doesn't mean that you're trying to replace all of your processes or everything that you do with Gen AI. It's like, how does it fit in the business? How does it offer value? We're not just doing it just to say that we're using it, but how can we use it to help our leaders understand what's happening and what's to come, and really make those efficiency and value benefits. So that's where we see, when we talk to clients, and also when we take the approach internally, that's what we're seeing kind of evolve and come to fruition on a daily basis at the moment.
Love it. Thanks so much, Matt. And I'll take it up with Natan later about, Wi-Fi is only one piece of that puzzle. When you have a home security system that tells you if there's a power surge or anything that would be an obvious indicator, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You really need that full scope, and you need to be able to be hands-on with that data so that you can then troubleshoot. Otherwise, you're looking at, the ultimate single potential point of failure, which you never want the comms team to be. And I think this is where that get started piece is really critical. And I know, Matt, you and the team have really formulated, this is part of the AMEC IEF, and you and the team have really formulated a lot of your approach around this because it is agile. It can be modified for the industry, for various types of problems. So talk through a little bit, if you don't mind, about using the IEF and specifically this around how you're able to align those objectives and get the clients to that piece if they're struggling to differentiate between organizational objectives and comms objectives.
Yeah, sure. And I think the reason why we wanted to kind of talk this through the IAF with people is because it does really ground you in that linking PR metrics back to business goals, to what Natan's report showed, and then managing stakeholder expectations. So how can you start with that organizational objective and align the comms objectives to that? We can have a conversation with clients and say, hey, what are we trying to achieve? But if they give you a woolly answer like, we just want to increase awareness, it's okay. We need to take a step back. We need to ask more questions, maybe 5 whys type approach to really get to that, the real objective as to why they're doing something. And then I think what's great about the IEF is really it shows you that you need to be audience-led in your approach, which I think sometimes, over the years we see, hey, we just want to put this comms release out there. We want to get eyeballs on it. We want to get hits in the media, but it's like, but who are you wanting to get in front of? So the IEF really grounds you back into who are you actually trying to get in front of, and what's the strategy, what's the plan in place to do that. And then it's going through those implementation techniques, the outputs, outtakes, outcomes, impact, and really like getting to grips with what metrics are important to track, maybe at one stage, but maybe aren't going to deliver you that impact metric that we can really lean on to show the overall business value. And it's helping to formulate a framework that when we speak to clients, and some of our clients are more data literate than others, we've all been in those conversations where we talk about data and you can see people's eyes glaze over. So I think this type of framework can really help with that, because it's really clear. You're clearly defining the objectives and then feeding it all the way through. So it's almost like your thread. And what's great about this, even as a visual, is it shows that it's almost like a never-ending flywheel effect of how the measurement feeds back into the objectives. And again, similar to what we said previously, it's about taking those learnings from what you're seeing in the data and then feeding back into your strategies from that. So yeah, these types of resources that AMEC provide have been critical to kind of increasing the knowledge in our own agency. When I'm talking to internal teams, but often when we talk to clients, and John, I think I mentioned this to you previously, that on RFPs now, measurement is pretty much a fundamental part of every RFP that we receive. And just being able to kind of go to them with a framework and an approach that we feel confident in and that we know that works really allows us to give confidence back to that client that we know what we're talking about, and B, that we can deliver them ROI on kind of the program. So yeah, this, for anyone who hasn't used the IEF, I would recommend as a next step, get on the AMEC website and start using it. And if you need some tips and pointers, there's a lot of great resources across the site to help you.
Thank you,
Shameless
Matt.
plug.
Yeah, that wonderful commercial for the IEF. But I think the keys that you touched on there is that you don't have to compromise stakeholder value for data, right? This gives you the roadmap of how the two come together and can help guide. And as a special consideration for Matt and that beautiful commercial for the AMEC IEF, if you reach out to Matt on LinkedIn, or if you have his email address, he will give you a code so that you can go through the AMEC resource of the IEF, which is that tutorial, which shows you how to use that. So it really is a roadmap for being able to use that with your clients, with your team. So Matt will have a code. Yeah, this is the call to action part where you've got to reach out to Matt, make friends with him, and then he'll be able to give you free access to that for the next 30 days. So thanks, Matt. Though I think it really is important that you all are using that and how you're able to do it. And I was on recording a podcast last week where people talk about the O's, right? Oh, the O's are what create some confusion for people. But I think this is really that part where when you're able to lay that down for them and give them the very clear direction of what that means, how have you all been able to be effective both at Hotwire and at Muck Rack, who's an AMEC member? I know that a lot of your people are using this too, to be able to give them some of that priority of how they're approaching things and understanding how to create that value internally with their marketing and advertising peers. So do you have at least a roadmap or something that's going to help us get through this together, Matt?
Yeah, so I mean, this outputs, outtakes, outcomes, and impact framework, sometimes when you say that to people, they don't really understand what you're talking about. Like, let's be honest. So outputs are almost kind of like what activities do you want people to see? Outtakes are kind of that those think activities and what you want people to think. And then outcomes is feel, and then impact is do. So if you think see, think, feel, do, that feels a little bit more familiar to people than what the framework is. So I was delivering a talk last week, and it was to an internal comms audience. So I was saying, if you've got a staff survey that you want to put out to understand and identify issues amongst your employee base, the way that you might want to think about it is the outputs are your newsletters, your town halls, your recognition programs, your outtakes, so maybe your open and click-through rates within the emails, and understanding the audience attendance across your events. And then outcomes is the employee satisfaction scores. What are they? Let's analyze them, and the awareness around your activities. And then that impact is, hey, have we improved productivity and retention across our staff? So that's a practical example of how you might operationalize this, because I think that operationalizing of any framework is where people can either kind of grind to a halt, or they really embrace it and understand this is something that we can take forwards, and this is going to help us deliver better value back to our clients. So yeah, just thinking about it in that way, and laying out your metrics in a really clear way to enable you to measure at each step of the process. Because I know that previously we've probably all we've seen instances where step one is the only step that's being measured, and you're just like, no, come on, we can do better than that. So this framework just allows for that that process to be done, and then for us, again, thinking about learning and optimization, we can use this data to really set benchmarks, to identify baselines, to then measure up off of the future. But Natan, how are you using it at Muck Rack? How are you taking this type of approach?
Yeah, I love to hear that. Definitely aligns with what we're doing, and I think we love the IEF too. And I think the piece we're focused on, which might be a little bit obvious, is kind of like a PR platform, is the different ways you could do customizable measurement to account for exactly what you're doing. So I think that's what we think a lot about is, there's not going to be one set of measurement that helps you get to the answers of figuring out what, if you were successful with your outcomes and impact. So one example that we recently came up with is we developed a proprietary metric called the PR hit score, which is focused specifically on like media coverage that you get. And it allows you to kind of use a series of different customizable metrics, whether your key messaging is coming through, or whether specific types of media are more important than others. And in your settings on Muck Rack, you can go in and customize that based off of what's most important to whatever you're measuring. And I think that's a big kind of move for us to move away from just like one set of metrics that makes sense for everybody, even though there's still going to be common metrics that we see, which I know we'll talk about in a bit. But for us, it's the idea that to actually get to be able to get to this point where you have, different outcomes, different impact, and different results that you're hoping for, you need to be able to customize what's a little bit more important. And I think a lot of times technology tools have been pretty rigid in either wanting you to measure something in the way that it's always been measured or in a way that isn't too flexible. And I think when it comes to, measuring earned media, you have to be super flexible because it's not as simple as paid media. So that's our specific take. That's obviously only one small piece of this. And I think the internal survey is a great example where there's so many different elements and ways that you can think about it. But that's near and dear to our heart since media coverage has always been a specialty of ours.
Great. So along that line, when you talk about, some of the new indexes that you all are putting forward, what metrics and data sources do PR pros use to analyze their performance now? Is it still this heavy reliance on news data, on news coverage? Are they moving more towards reputation? Is that part of what, if they aren't, is that what's stagnating us in this vicious cycle of, what is the silver bullet? Because once you're looking at reputation, you realize it's so much more complex that it isn't a single metric. So which metrics are you all talking about that you're finding are resonating the most with your audiences and helping them really deliver that ROI back to their organization?
Yeah, totally. And I'll start since our data's up here. Well, I think it's still the traditional metrics. That's still for sure what the majority is. And I think, as you were talking about a bit before, Matt, like it's going to take time to shift perceptions into something new. Um, but you'll see here, the number of stories placed, reach impressions. I'm excited that key message pull through is pretty high up there. I think that is an important one that's never going to go away. I think it's kind of what you do with these common metrics that matters the most. I don't necessarily think it's the worst thing that they're still there. I think it's the reality that just measuring them isn't enough. It's the fact that determining what they mean or if you could match them to business outcomes really matters a lot. Ultimately, I think number of stories placed when it comes to a specific media relations PR goal, that's never going to go away. Quantity is always going to matter to some degree. And I think where we see quality mattering a bit more is things like key message pull through or the actual messages that you want coming through. And what impact is it having on something like your website? Is it driving conversions or helping with SEO? And you could see some of the other ones, I think like sentiment, as you get down to like 19%, sentiment is going to start getting better and better and better because of generative AI and how much more you can customize what sentiment means to really teach it. So I think, my perspective is there's kind of two different things going on. It's these traditional metrics that we've heard about forever that people are continuing to use, but how they're using them is starting to change. And I think that's really the positive sign. But I think it's going to take a while until we see like, brand reputation be the number one measurement result here. And then I also think you could measure brand reputation in lots of different ways using key message pull through and some of these other things. So I don't think these are meant to, be a complete, negative result to see, we're not changing, we're still using impressions. I think it's the reality that it's not about them changing. It's about what are we going to do with them that's innovative.
Yeah, and I think what our survey showed was that only 10% of people are solely relying on that kind of quantity metric, which is good, which actually made me very happy when I saw the results that we're not seeing, that 50% bar wasn't just on, hey, how many hits did we get? Or, hey, we got 3 billion impressions. Like, you didn't get 3 billion impressions. Just leave that out of the report and move on. So it made me happy to see that 10% just at the quantity metrics. And then, as we move through to the right of the chart, we're seeing using some of the additional data, Nathan, like you said, from media monitoring tools. And so maybe it's the key message pull through, and some of that sentiment analysis, and they're pairing them all together. But I think what's important, as you alluded to, is the context in which you present the results back. If you're presenting it without any context, and which is why some of the frameworks that we discussed on the previous slides are so important, because you're always aligning everything that you're measuring back to that overall objective, that comms objective and that organizational objective. So depending on what you are trying to achieve, you're going to need a mix of metrics. We obviously always talk about the peso metric from that peso model, and those different channels. We added in some audience insights tools like Bombora, which I don't know how familiar people are on the call, but that's an intent data tool, which is primarily a marketing type of data. But obviously, being a marketing and communications consultancy, we get data from different parts of the spectrum, so we can start to understand purchase intent from potential customers, which then can feed into marketing campaigns. So things like that give you a richer sense of data, but obviously it only matters if that's your organization or that's the objective that you're hitting. Otherwise, it's another metric that's meaningless on another slide that's meaningless. So yeah, it's good to see the shift away from just quantity and more towards that quality output that we saw. And this speaks to that operationalizing that framework, Jonah, that we were talking about with the IEF. So this is just an example that we pulled together a snippet of what we might start to produce for a client to put on a slide as to how you might start to build out a measurement framework based on the channels that you're using, the types of objectives that you're trying to hit. Obviously, we've had to anonymize a lot of this because we've taken it from some live examples. But this is where, and I always think that speaking to clients and speaking to internal stakeholders, that sometimes data, and I still think that data can be overwhelming a lot of the time to people, when you're thinking about the vast amounts of different metrics that you can look at. Taking them all and putting it in a framework, even just in different columns, can feel a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more achievable. So taking this and then on the next slide, Jonah, I think then adding that context to it, which is what we've been speaking about, and taking that framework from outputs, outtakes, outcomes, and aligning it to objectives can really take your measurement approach up a level and start to understand, okay, so maybe there are 3 objectives and we're doing well in 2 of them, but the third one we're not quite hitting the mark. What can we do to improve that? And just laying them out with this context can really help sharpen the way that we analyze results. So this is what we try to do for the clients. Obviously, we try to add a percentage point uplift on there as well, so we can actually see that movement and those trends over time, and whether we're hitting the objectives that we want. But this just shows how we're helping clients to kind of navigate that sometimes overwhelming sense that they can get from looking at a sea of metrics. And Natan, I think you mentioned this in what you're doing with Muck Rack and some of the customizable metrics that you're helping teams operationalize. I mean, this is exactly what we try to do with our clients. Is definitely not take a one size fits all. I don't think those slides that we took on previously, if anyone was on the webinar and taken a screenshot of them, I wouldn't just take that into your next deck and say, hey, we've nailed it. I'd say use that as a foundation, as a template, and customize it based on really what matters. And then, as it says, the KPI should reflect kind of that ultimate mission and objectives. And Natan, I think that's what you're trying to do at Muck Rack as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I loved seeing on the previous slide, sentiment and key message pull through as some of the most important pieces of the outcomes. I think, yeah, for us, the fact that we're always gonna have to have impressions on Muck Rack. We're always gonna have to have things like add value, which is something we avoided adding for a long time because of how much at odds it is with earned media at times. But they're important, and there's good reason they're important to the industry. So those kind of like core, individual metrics are going to be important. I think what's getting really exciting, like you're saying, here's what you do with them and how you can customize that approach. And for us, the fact that we were able to build such a customizable PR hit score where every, user can go in and kind of define it how they want in a non-overwhelming way is totally because of the advances in technology that allow us to do that. So that's definitely like a tool that we were able to build with our generative AI power that we've started incorporating into Muck Rack. And so I think that's kind of why, to reiterate, we're in a two different narratives here where we're still using these traditional metrics that everyone is kind of annoyed with. I don't think anyone's ever said, I love using impressions, they're the greatest thing ever, but they're not going anywhere. But at the same time, you're able to kind of do a lot more with them to show impact and value. And I love seeing, some of those other intent metrics and some of those other things incorporating into, you mentioned kind of the peso model. And I think what's really exciting for PR and comms is that we're able to start incorporating more of these than ever before. Even 5, 10 years ago, the idea of, trying to use intent data to help inform or publish results on your PR and earned media strategy would have been completely unheard of. But I think now it's a lot more possible. And I think overall, it's because earned media and what we're trying to do is becoming a lot more important in the world. Non-earned media is a lot less effective, and regardless of what side of the coin you were on with the recent U.S. election, I think everyone can kind of agree that earned media won out paid media. And I think that's really exciting to me just to show how important all these different metrics are and what we do with them as measurement professionals is what's going to kind of set us apart from those who are just spending on paid media. And that's where I think there's a big opportunity here and why I really love this slide and how you laid it out.
I will say, just to jump in, as a good steward of AMEC, just because added value is available in a platform, do not use it.
So, and I will add that it is that media costs that add value is not an equivalency, right? That is Barcelona principle, the most unchanged ever, is that it is not an equivalency. It is not the value of PR and comms. But, to that effect, PR agencies, CCOs who are bonused on that, I mean, that's still an indicator that they're using in their index, in their scorecard. I think, Natan, we could probably have a whole discussion on, your framework and what you're using of how they are customizing that information in the platform. Is it customized based on the organizational objective or to conflate perhaps some of the comms metrics? And I think that's an interesting ethical discussion that can be debated many, many times over many, many years. But I think that's always the indication. And I know that while that is provided because of the demand around agencies, that our AMEC members do make sure that they are talking about it in context of an index, and that no single metric is ever that end all be all silver bullet and demonstrating that value. And so it is some of those demands of the market, and that is part of that process of educating people through what they know to what they need to know, right? Because and with executives as well, with the C-suite, if they've been seeing it and been sold that it's some indicator of how well people are doing, and that changes, they need to be educated as to why the industry and the market is changing. And I think there's also a lot of value in understanding that difference between earned and paid. When it comes time to train the future of the large language models, they're not using advertising content to do that, right? They're using earned content. Earned content is one of the best trainers of large language models. because it gives context, it gives objectivity, it's giving like that contrast and counterpoint that you don't get in paid media. And so I think that's an important understanding for people to know what's also training those large language models of that AI that they're now leaning on very heavily. And I think you've talked a little bit about this in both the models, but how are people currently reporting those results? And how important is some of that data visualization, right? How are they able to really convey and express that response? I think is what we want to talk about next. And we'll go and start with you, Natan.
Yeah, well, I think you can see here it's still very difficult to do that and convey it for all the reasons we were just talking about. The fact that it's not as simple as just using, the Scarlet ad equivalency metric is kind of proof in that we all wish it were that simple, but it's clearly not. So I think, regardless of all our efforts, it's still really difficult, which is why we're here, which is why I think, AMEX Measurement Month is so important to kind of keep this on top of mind for the industry, especially as we're going into a new year with lots of unknowns. So that's kind of the result. I think we still got a lot of work to do, which is the main headline here.
Yeah, and I think what we try to do for all of our clients is we try to set up a real-time kind of dashboard for them, either in the platform that we're using, or we have our own kind of comms IQ solution, which we're overlaying some of our insights on top of some of those coverage metrics. But from our report, we still see that these static PowerPoints and PDFs and spreadsheets are still the prevalent way that most PR pros are measuring and reporting the results back, which it wasn't a surprise. I would say that that's probably still the most prevalent, but I would say that if you want to just keep learning from the data, similar to what we were saying previously, maybe that static PowerPoint isn't going to enable you to do that. So it's finding maybe the mix of using those real-time dashboards to understand the changes and the patterns and reduce the room for human error when manipulating data in spreadsheets and Google Sheets. We all know that even if you're an expert, sometimes you're tired, and whereas a dashboard can aggregate this information easily and do it automatically. But we also know that most C-suite or most meetings that you go into, there might be a PDF that you need to present. So it's finding that balance between how to keep on top of the data that's coming through, and then how to tell the story with the data, and through those stories, ultimately convey your business value back to your C-suite.
I love that. And I think that even through some custom GPTs, I've seen some very interesting work that people have tried to do using visualization, right? So they've set up their personas, they've set this up to consume the data that they have to create a visual. And it's easy to identify a crisis, right? And it's easy to identify when everything is perfect. But it's that abstract of those in-between areas where you're starting to see that ebb and flow that even ChatGPT can't visualize that in a way that's meaningful. And that's why I think what you are doing with being able to bring in some of those other insights makes it absolutely critical for how people are looking to really understand and consume data in a meaningful way. And, I want to turn over the last couple of words to, I think, you and Matt, you and Natan. I'll start with Natan. As we look at, that real-time reporting, what are some of those limitations? And I think you've spoken to those, but also, what is the real power of storytelling? Because we are dealing with the industry who are the masters of storytelling. And so how is that working on their behalf, and what are some of those limitations and pitfalls that they still need to be aware of as well?
Yeah, I can definitely start. I think in terms of that mix between like a real-time dashboard and customize like a PDF or something, I agree. It's still kind of like both are really important, and we provide both. We obviously have real-time dashboards, but we allow you to customize your presentations however you need to export them. And I think it kind of depends on what group of stakeholders you're dealing with to understand which is the most important. We definitely see, examples where there's C-suite teams who want to be able to log in and see things happen in real time because they get it. They're maybe more familiar with the metrics, or it impacts what they're doing more, or maybe they're just part of a team where they're in it as a contributor to a media relations strategy or a crisis, and they need to know. And then there are times there, yeah, they just need to know something that comes up for a board meeting or an important meeting like that. I think what's really kind of telling is how much we see a shift in, the C-suite wanting access to more dashboards and more real-time information. And I think that's testament to how quickly things are moving and changing, and how much more important the comms executive is becoming within the boardroom. And I think, the fact that a crisis can merge up out of nowhere, you really need to be savvy and need to be able to answer things. And while maybe previously a chief comms officer could rely on, 2 weeks of prep to get a deck together that they'd practice presenting and do in a board meeting, now, because they're at a more important seat at the table, I think they're expected to know how to use tools like a Muck Rack, but also to understand the measurement in much more real time, because the CEO might be asking about it. And, we've heard tons of examples over the years of clients, of PR teams, like wanting Muck Rack access and email alerts because, they don't want their CEO to find out about something before them, because their CEO is so savvy and wants to know about the news and cares so much about it. And that was like 5, 10 years ago. Now it's amplified by 100. I think every single major executive across the world is probably thinking more about how they can pay attention to the news and what's going on and different kinds of insights. And it's no longer enough just to read the top publication in your region. You got to know about the top podcasts now and the top newsletters, because those are kind of what's moving the world. And we woke up, a couple of weeks ago in America now, and we all kind of realized that like, wow, podcasts had a way bigger impact than anything else this election. And I think that's just showing how much things are changing in terms of media consumption, and how savvy people need to be. So that's kind of our take on it, in terms of how exciting it's coming from a technology provider that everyone kind of wants a piece of it. But definitely excited to get your take more, Matt, especially on the storytelling side itself.
Yeah, and just to touch on that new media, like we're starting to talk to clients about Substacks and things like that. Probably you would never have had that conversation with a year ago, because maybe they weren't a thing. So it's like, how do we start to introduce these new media into your traditional tier one set that they may never have encountered or considered before? And this is where data can really help, because we can tell them, this is where your audience is actually living. So if you get a hit on a Substack, you're going to be reaching 60% of your intended audience, and trying to engage them in that way. And just on the storytelling aspect, I always tell my team, just be curious about the data that you're seeing. Don't just present what that first cut might be. Ask questions of it, and then kind of provide that context. And then through that, the whole point of data and the way that we use data to consult with our clients is to give them clarity, so they can go back to their business with certainty around what results are driving and what the impact is. So in terms of storytelling, I always just, almost the 3 C's for my team is that kind of curiosity, that context, and that clarity about how to deliver a powerful story back to the business using data.
Love it. And I think, Matt, when you talk about those best practices, it really does hit on all of those pieces, right? To keep them curious and to keep them going through the data, looking at the crosstabs. What is it going to mean? What is it going to mean to each of the different stakeholders? And not thinking that there is ever, even within an organization, a single story to tell, right? That's that trick, is that the data tells so many stories. It depends on who you're talking to as for how that's going to resonate with them.
Yeah, exactly. And you saying crosstabs just made me come back to how many hours I spent looking at the election polling data, and I was just deep in it. So that's given me flashbacks to about a month ago, where I was just like, my head was going in all kinds of directions. But yeah, just keep looking at different cuts of data, how they can tell different stories. If you look at only one slice of the data, you might be missing the entire story. So look at the breadth of the data and understand what you need to analyze together, maybe what's going to give you that context to tell the right story.
If it's any consolation, it was a very crowded rabbit hole. So you were amongst friends.
I know I'm speaking to the right audience with that.
So wonderful. Well, thank you both for a great discussion, and thank both of your organizations for being contributing members of AMEC and for this collaboration that you've really carried through this whole year. I think it's a wonderful testimonial of the community, but also of the collaboration and the relationships that are built there. And thank you both for sharing your thought leadership and your generosity of really helping to educate and bring the whole industry along in a way where we're able to meet them where they are and to bring them forward, as we all need to be brought forward as things are changing so quickly. So special thanks to Hotwire for helping organize and put this presentation together. It is Matt leads the data team, but they have an amazing marketing and leadership team throughout that support best practice and to put all of this forward. And so a special thanks to all of them. And we will look forward to more conversations. You can reach out to Matt or Natan for a special code for access to those resources that we talked about earlier. And a special thanks to all of you for sharing your time with us during this conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Happy Measurement Month, everyone.
Thank you.